The young slave she bought to save. A forbidden love that rewrote Charleston's history. South Carolina, 1857. Charleston, South Carolina, August 1859. The courtyard behind the city jail reeked of sweat, mildew, and old fear. Rain hadn't yet broken the heat. It hung above the city like a lid on a boiling pot. 24 white men stood in a loose half-circle, hats low, faces hard. A few ladies watched from the safety of their carriages, veils drawn, fans twitching like nervous birds. In the center of the yard, tied shirtless to the whipping post, stood a young black man. His wrists were bound so tight the rope had cut into skin. Blood had already dried in thin, rust-colored rivers along his forearms from an earlier struggle. His back, broad, roped with muscle, was still as if carved from dark oak. Only the rhythm of his breathing betrayed the pain he was bracing for. His name was Isaiah. 50 lashes, the sheriff announced, unfolding a crumpled slip of paper. For assaulting a white woman and attempting to flee lawful bondage. A murmur of approval rolled through the watchers, low and ugly. Only one person in that yard knew the truth. She was standing just behind the sheriff, her gloved hands clenched at her sides, green eyes burning in a pale face framed by a black widow's veil. Eleanor Whitfield, mistress of Cypress Gate Plantation. 28 years old, wealthy, untouchable by most reckonings, and shaking so hard inside her bones she thought she might split in two, because it was her name on that paper, her testimony that had condemned Isaiah, her silence that had allowed the lie to stand. The overseer stepped forward, whip coiled in his hand like a sleeping snake. "On the count, ma'am," the sheriff said, tipping his hat toward Eleanor. "You may wish to step back. This won't be pleasant for a lady." Eleanor did not step back. Instead, she stepped forward. "One moment," she said, voice sharp enough to cut through the humid air. "Before you raise that whip, there is something I must say, under oath, if you require it." Every head turned. Isaiah lifted his, and for the first time since dawn, their eyes met across the packed red earth. In his gaze there was no pleading, no hatred, only a steady, wounded question. Was she really going to let them do this? And in that heartbeat, Eleanor understood. The lie that protected her place in this world was about to cost him his life, his body, his future, unless she shattered it, along with everything she had ever been taught to value. "Sheriff," she said, swallowing the taste of fear, "your record is incorrect. Isaiah did not assault me. If there is guilt in this yard, it is mine. And if there is a soul to be judged today, it should be mine before God's law and man's." The yard erupted in shouts. The whip froze in midair. And somewhere, in the dark space between what the law allowed and what the heart demanded, history began to shift. Before we dive deeper into this harsh moral verdict, I want to know who is walking through this story with me tonight. From which city or country are you listening to this tale? Leave a comment and let me know. 3 months earlier. The morning bell at Cypress Gate rang long before the sun cleared the black line of the marshes. Its iron voice rolled over the rice fields, across the slave quarters, and up the long avenue of live oaks that led to the big house, shaking the last tatters of sleep out of every body it touched. The air already felt heavy, as if the night had not cooled so much as thickened. By noon the heat would be a living thing, pressing down on shoulders and lungs, turning breath into work. Isaiah was awake before the bell. He lay on his pallet in the corner of the cramped cabin he shared with 3 other men, staring up at the smoke-darkened rafters, while the last of the night insects whined outside. He listened to the familiar sounds. Someone clearing a throat in the next cabin, the soft slosh of water being poured into a basin, a baby's thin cry quickly shushed. He counted the seconds between the first gray light and the bell's clang. The plantation ran on such measurements, on bells and shadows, on where the sun sat when you were allowed to swallow a mouthful of water, on how much light was left when they finally let you stop. Up, Isaiah, Ben muttered, rolling off his pallet with a creak of old joints. Overseer be watching close today. Storm took out half a levee downfield. White folks ain't happy. When are they ever? Isaiah said quietly. He rose in one smooth movement. The others always said he moved like a cat, silent and contained, no wasted motion. Even in the dimness you could see the lines of muscle in his shoulders and arms, carved by 10 years of dragging, lifting, cutting, hoeing. He was not the biggest man in the quarters, but there was a settled strength about him, the kind that comes from doing hard work so long your body has forgotten how not to. He washed his face in cold water that smelled faintly of iron, ran wet fingers over his close-cropped hair, and stepped out into the grey dawn. Cypress Gate spread around him, its beauty and its brutality woven together so tightly they were impossible to separate. To the east lay the rice fields, flat and glinting, cut into narrow rectangles by raised earthen banks. The dikes held back the brackish water from the tidal creeks beyond, water that brought life to the rice and sickness to the people who tended it. In summer, the air above the flooded fields shimmered with heat and insects, a low hum that never fully stopped. To the west rose the big house, perched on the only high ground for miles, its white columns catching the first color of the sun. The house turned its best face toward the river, where visiting planters would arrive by boat. From that angle, Cypress Gate looked like the picture of southern grace. Wide porches, rocking chairs, a fan of stone steps, flower beds overflowing with camellias and roses. From the rear, where the quarters clustered and the smoke from the cookhouse blackened the sky, it looked different. Isaiah walked with the others toward the tool shed, shoulders squared, gaze straight ahead. He almost never spoke unless spoken to. The other field hands had long since learned that his silence was not fear nor dullness, but a choice. There was pride in that silence. He knew things he was not supposed to know. He could read, for one. Isaiah's mother had taught him letters on the sly, tracing them in the dust of the cabin floor with a broken bit of stick when he was a boy, no higher than her hip. Later, an older house servant who'd once belonged to a Charleston bookseller had smuggled him scraps of newspaper and the odd torn Bible page. Isaiah learned to fit sounds to shapes, to pull meaning out of ink and paper. Books were forbidden to him. Words were not. He kept that secret close, like the small wooden cross he wore on a string under his shirt, carved in the shape of his father's hands. He read only when he was sure no one watched, by the faint light that leaked from the big house windows at night, or in the shed when sent to fetch something alone. It gave him a way to think beyond the lines of the fields, beyond the next crop, beyond the lash. The overseer, Mr. Cobb, stood beside the tool shed with his whip coiled at his hip, hat brim low over his pale eyes. His gaze moved over the gathering workers, weighing, measuring, always looking for the smallest slackening. "Levee broke on the south field," he barked. "We got to shore it up today, or the tide'll take your whole year's worth of work. You don't want that. Neither do I." He smiled when he said it, and there was something in that smile that made Isaiah's stomach knot. They were lining up for tools when the door of the big house opened. Even from this distance, Isaiah knew her. Most days, the mistress of Cypress Gate, Eleanor Whitfield by birth, Mrs. Eleanor Marsh by law and church record, did not show herself outside before noon. The housemaid said mornings were when she read her letters from New Orleans, when she walked the shaded side of the veranda with her coffee, when she composed herself like another part of the house's decoration. Today she stepped out early, as the sun lifted its edge over the marsh, turning the flooded fields to sheets of glass. Her gown was simple by plantation standards, a pale cotton with a high collar despite the heat. The black ribbon still tied around her upper arm, years after her father's death, had faded to a soft charcoal. Her auburn hair was pinned in place with more care than color. It was the hair of a woman who dressed herself. What struck Isaiah most was not her clothes, but the way she carried herself, She was small-boned, almost fragile in build, but there was a stiffness in her spine that did not belong to fragility. Her face, pale beneath the brim of her hat, was composed in the perfect blankness white society expected, polite, distant, untouchable. Only her eyes betrayed her. They were green, an unusual color in this humid brown world, and when they swept over the yard, they did not glide past the people in it as if they were furniture, the way other planters' wives' eyes did. They paused, registered, remembered. Isaiah knew because once, in the cool of early spring, he had looked up from a wheelbarrow of bricks and found those eyes on him. For the briefest moment they had met, slave and mistress, and something like recognition had passed between them. Not of each other as individuals, they had hardly spoken, but of something else. Of mutual awareness, perhaps, of the fact that both of them, in different ways, were not quite what this place wanted them to be. That day, she had looked away quickly, as if burned. Now, as she descended the front steps with a ledger tucked under her arm, Mr. Marsh followed. Eleanor's husband filled the doorway like a bad memory. Tall, broad, his once handsome features now softened by drink and easy living, Victor Marsh moved with the careless confidence of a man the world had never told no. He smelled of brandy even in the morning. The buttons of his waistcoat strained slightly over a stomach that had forgotten hunger years ago. "Cobb," he called, not bothering to raise his voice. The whole yard could hear him anyway. "Make sure those boys earn the food I pay for. We lost enough to that last flood. I won't have another season of losses." "Yes, sir," the overseer said, hat already in hand. Isaiah watched from the line, jaw set. He had seen how Victor Marsh treated the people he owned. The scars on the backs of some of the men around him spelled it out in raised, twisted letters. He had also seen how Victor Marsh treated his wife. At suppers, from his place near the dining room door as a temporary footman, Isaiah had watched the way Eleanor's shoulders tightened when her husband refilled his glass. How she flinched when his hand dropped too heavily on her arm. How she never, ever contradicted him in public, yet sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, her fingers dug into the linen tablecloth as if she were holding on to the edge of the world. Cypress Gate's big house was full of polished wood and imported fabrics, but the air inside it often felt colder than the damp night air above the rice fields. Loneliness had a different scent in the big house than in the quarters, but it lay just as thick. As the field hands filed past for their tools, Isaiah felt Eleanor's gaze crossed the yard again. For a heartbeat, it brushed his face and lingered. Her expression did not change. To anyone watching, she was simply surveying her property. But Isaiah felt something like a question there, as if she were searching his features for a name to put to the unease that had begun to stir in her own heart. A bell rang again, sharper this time. Work began. Under the hammering sun, sweat ran into Isaiah's eyes as he and the others lifted sandbags, waded through the sucking mud of the broken levee, fought the tide itself with shovels and bare hands. Mosquitoes whined incessantly. The air tasted of salt and rot, and the sour tang of fear. Everyone knew if the levee failed, the overseer's whip would look for someone to blame. Up on the levee bank, in the shade of a parasol held by a housemaid, Eleanor stood with her ledger. Officially, she was there to inspect the damage and calculate the losses. Unofficially, she could not stay inside. Watching the men struggle against the river reminded her of something she could not yet name, the feeling of trying to hold back something larger than herself, with nothing but will and bare hands. Her eyes found Isaiah again, down in the churned mud, shoulders straining as he lifted a sack twice his size. His face was set, jaw tight, but his movements were precise, controlled. When another man slipped, Isaiah's hand shot out, catching him before the water could take him. He did not shout, he did not curse. He simply nodded once as if to say, "I will not let you fall," then turned back to his work. Eleanor marked something on her ledger that had nothing to do with Rice or LaVe's. A name. Isaiah. She underlined it once, the ink soaking deeper into the page. In a world built on ownership, on ledgers and lists of human beings turned into numbers, she did not yet know that writing his name would become her quiet rebellion. He did not yet know that in the humid heat of a Carolina summer, under a sky full of waiting storm, the first thread had been drawn between them. Thin, invisible, unbreakable, the storm arrived without warning. All morning, the heat had pressed down on Cypress Gate like a great, suffocating hand. Even the birds had gone silent. By early afternoon, the air tasted metallic, charged, as if the world were holding its breath. Isaiah felt the shift first. Workers who spent their lives outdoors always did. As he hammered the last stake into the newly repaired levee, a wind rolled across the marsh, colder than it had any right to be in August. "Storm coming," Ben muttered beside him, wiping his brow. Isaiah looked up. The sky over the treetops churned dark purple, clouds stacked like bruises. A bell rang from the main yard, 3 rapid chimes. The storm signal. Everyone was to secure tools, run to shelter, and shutter the low barns before the tidal winds hit. The overseer shouted orders. Men scattered. Isaiah was halfway across the field when another sound sliced through the rising wind. A woman's cry, high, sharp, close. Instinct spun him around. The cry had come from the old carriage house, a structure half-used and half-forgotten, where Eleanor had insisted on storing fragile heirlooms brought from her mother's home in New Orleans. Most days, no one went inside except the housemaids. But today, someone had. Lightning cracked open the sky. Isaiah ran. The wind whipped dust into his eyes as he reached the carriage house. The heavy double doors had been left half open, banging wildly against the frame with each gust. Inside, the shadows were thick. The air was so still it felt unnatural. "Hello," Isaiah called softly, stepping inside. No answer. Another lightning flash illuminated the room, and in the corner, he saw her, Eleanor. Pinned beneath a collapsed shelf, her skirts tangled, one arm trapped under a fallen wooden beam. Glass jars and old porcelain lay shattered around her. Her hat had fallen, auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She was breathing fast, shallow, the kind of breath that came from pain and panic together. She tried to lift the beam with her free hand, but winced, collapsing back. "Isaiah," she whispered, startled to see him. Don't come near me. If someone sees—" But another gust hit the carriage house, slamming the doors wider and knocking a lantern off its hook. It crashed to the floor, sparks scattering dangerously close to the spilled oil of a broken lamp. There was no more time. Isaiah crossed the room in 3 strides. "Hold still," he said. Eleanor's eyes widened, not in fear, but in something far more raw. Reluctant trust, desperation, a woman raised to never rely on a man she did not command, realizing she had no one else. The beam across her arm was heavier than it looked, oak, soaked from humidity, one end wedged beneath a trunk. Isaiah braced his feet and heaved. The muscles in his back burned as the wood resisted, then finally gave way just enough for Eleanor to yank her arm free. She cried out as pain shot through her wrist. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked. She shook her head, trembling. "It's not broken." "Good. We need to move. Storm's not waiting for us." But when she tried to stand, her ankle buckled. Isaiah caught her before she hit the ground, and for one suspended heartbeat, she leaned into him. Her fingers gripped his shoulder. His hand circled her waist to steady her. It was the first time their bodies had touched. The rules of 1,000 brutal years screamed between them. A white mistress, a black enslaved man, alone touching. And yet the world did not end. Not in that moment. Outside, thunder rolled like the roar of an angry crowd. Rain began to lash the roof. The wind forced the doors shut with a violent crack, plunging the carriage house into dimness broken only by streaks of lightning. "You can't walk in this storm," Isaiah said. "Let me carry you." "No," Eleanor whispered, breath shaking. "The overseer, my husband, if they see—" "Storm's too loud. No one's outside," he said. "Please, you'll get hurt worse." He did not wait for permission she could not give. Gently, he lifted her, arms under her knees and back, her weight light but trembling against him. Eleanor gasped softly, fingers clutching the collar of his shirt as another thunderclap shook the building. She could smell the rain on his skin. He could feel her heartbeat through the damp fabric of her dress. Outside, the world was drowning. Inside, something unspoken broke open between them. He carried her toward the door, one careful, impossible step after another. And neither realized it yet, but this was the moment Charles Marsh would later call a crime. The moment the noose would someday be tied for, the moment when fate slipped its first knot around both their throats. The storm did not let them escape easily. As Isaiah carried Eleanor out of the carriage house, the rain struck like needles. Winds whipped across the yard, tearing branches from the old pecan trees and sending them skittering across the ground. The sky was a violent, endless bruise overhead, purple and black and cracking open with lightning every few breaths. "Hold on," he said gently. He tightened his grip around her, not too tight, but securely, and she clung to him with one trembling hand around his neck. Every step was deliberate. The mud sucked at his boots, the rain made the ground slick, treacherous, and Eleanor's weight, though light, demanded constant balance. She buried her face briefly against his shoulder when a bolt of lightning hit a tree just a dozen yards away. The explosion echoed like gunfire. "I've got you," Isaiah murmured. He didn't mean to say it aloud, and yet her breath steadied, just slightly. The main house loomed ahead, its white columns almost ghostly in the storm's darkness. They reached the back steps, where the wooden planks were slick with rainwater. Isaiah carried her up carefully, one step at a time. "Please be careful," she whispered. "I will." He pushed open the servants' entrance, stepped into the dim hallway and gently lowered her to the ground, but when she tried to stand on her own, her injured ankle collapsed again. A soft cry escaped her lips before she managed to swallow it. "Sit," he said, steadying her. She did, and for a moment they were simply two human beings, panting, soaked through, the storm raging beyond the walls, while something quieter and far more dangerous stirred between them. "Thank you," she whispered. You saved me. You would have done the same for anyone on this land. But you came running," she said softly, "even though you didn't know who you'd find inside." He didn't answer. Not because he had nothing to say, because he had far too much. Her auburn hair clung to her cheek. Mud streaked her dress and the delicate lace at her sleeve. She looked fragile and fierce all at once, and Isaiah realized, with a kind of quiet terror, he couldn't look away. One of the housemaids rounded the corner then, stopping abruptly at the sight of them. "Mrs. Marsh," she gasped, "let me fetch the doctor." "No," Eleanor said quickly, summoning the sharp authority of a mistress. "Get towels and hot water. That's all." Isaiah stepped back immediately, the magic of their moment shattered by reality. "Go dry yourself," Eleanor said, her tone reverting to the careful neutrality expected of her. "We will speak later." He nodded once. But her eyes followed him as he walked away, her chest tightening with something she refused, yet failed to name. That night changed everything. It began slowly. Eleanor ordered Isaiah to deliver a message to the house late in the evening, a message she could easily have sent through someone else. When he arrived at the side parlor, she insisted he stay and help carry the books she claimed were too heavy for the maids. She stood too close. He kept looking away. Neither spoke aloud the truth simmering beneath their words. The second night, she asked him to bring up a crate from the cellar. When he did, she lingered, asking how the storm had affected the Levies. She listened with real interest. Not the polite, distant curiosity typical of a mistress, but genuine attention. She found excuses. He found reasons not to refuse. By the third night, it wasn't excuses anymore. One evening, about a week after the storm, Eleanor walked into the library where Isaiah had been sent to stack wood by the fireplace. She paused at the doorway without meaning to, watching him. The firelight cast warm shadows across his back. Broad, powerful, defined by years of grueling labor. But it was not the strength of his body that drew her. It was the gentleness in the way he handled every log, the quiet calm with which he moved, the stillness that lived in him, even in the smallest gesture. Her breath caught unexpectedly in her chest. He sensed her there before she spoke. "Mrs. Marsh," he said softly, turning. Eleanor stepped inside. "Isaiah, I owe you another apology." "For what?" "For earlier today. My husband." She closed her eyes briefly. He spoke harshly. Isaiah hesitated. "He speaks harshly often." "To everyone," Eleanor whispered. "But toward you," she swallowed. "It was undeserved. You did nothing wrong." Isaiah studied her a moment. Really studied her. He had lived at Cypress Gate long enough to recognize which cruelties came from Charles Marsh's nature and which ones came from his fears. And the way Charles watched his wife, the suspicion in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw, had not escaped Isaiah. "You don't need to explain, ma'am," he said quietly. Her eyes softened. "I want to." A pause bloomed in the quiet room, warm and fragile as a candle flame. "Isaiah," she said again, voice smaller, "may I ask you something?" "You can ask anything. Are you afraid of me?" He blinked, startled. "Afraid of you?" "I wonder sometimes," she whispered, "whether the distance you keep is out of fear." Isaiah's heart beat once, hard. He looked at her, really looked, at the faint bruise on her wrist from where the shelf collapsed, at the way she held her hands clasped, trying to hide the tremor, at the sadness she thought no one noticed. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm afraid for you, not of you." Her lips parted. "For me?" He nodded. "Your husband. He ain't the kind of man who lets go of anything he thinks he owns. Not land, not people. A beat. Not even you." Eleanor's breath hitched. She lowered her gaze to the fire. "Isaiah, may I speak plainly? Without titles? If you want." I feel safe when you speak honestly," she whispered. "Safer than I've felt in a very long time." Isaiah's chest tightened painfully. Eleanor turned toward him, closer now. "Why did you run into the storm that day?" He answered without thinking. "Because I heard someone cry out. Because something in me knew it was you." The truth of it hung between them. Eleanor's breath trembled. "Isaiah, you must understand. This can't happen. Whatever this is, whatever we're feeling, it's impossible. It's dangerous. It's real," he finished gently. She looked up sharply. Their eyes met, green and molten, dark and steady. And the room seemed to exhale. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her face. "It scares me," she whispered. "It scares me too." "Then why aren't you stepping away?" "Because you're not," he said quietly. Her pulse jumped in her throat. Eleanor took one slow step forward. Isaiah didn't move. Another step. Now the firelight touched both their faces. She lifted her hand, hesitated, then, trembling, brushed her fingertips against his forearm. A soft, involuntary sound left her lips at the warmth of his skin. Isaiah inhaled sharply, eyes closing for half a second as if fighting some inner restraint. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, voice low, warning and pleading at once. "Eleanor," she whispered. "Call me Eleanor." His eyes opened. Something changed in that moment. Some final barrier, falling like a stone into water. "Eleanor," he said, barely breathing the word. She shivered. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. "If you want me to." She didn't. Her hand slid from his forearm to his wrist, then upward, tracing the elegant lines of his arm, feeling the quiet power there. "I don't want you to," she breathed. Isaiah stepped closer, slow, careful, reverent. His fingers brushed her cheek. She leaned into the touch like a woman starving for gentleness. Their foreheads met first, a soft, trembling contact neither had planned. Eleanor exhaled shakily against his mouth. "Isaiah." He cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing the corner of her lips. And then, slowly, cautiously, their lips touched. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of recognition, of two souls who had spent years suffocating, finally breathing the same air. She let out a soft sound, half sob, half relief. Isaiah kissed her again, deeper this time, his hand sliding to the small of her back, drawing her closer with a tenderness that felt like a promise. "Tell me if this is wrong," he whispered against her mouth. "It feels like the first right thing I've done in years," she replied. He kissed her again, and the forbidden bond sealed itself in the quiet library, while the storm raged outside. The nights that followed were made of stolen minutes and trembling hands. Eleanor would find reasons to pass through the gardens at dusk, and Isaiah would happen to be there fixing a lantern. In the early morning hours, she would send the maids away and ask that Isaiah deliver wood to her private sitting room. They spoke quietly at first, about books, storms, the river, the world outside the plantation neither of them could reach, but as the days passed, their conversations grew deeper. One night, as they stood by the window overlooking the marshlands, she asked, "Do you ever dream of leaving?" "Every day," he admitted, "but freedom costs more than most men can pay." "And what would you do if you had it?" she pressed gently. He hesitated, then said, "I would live quiet. I'd work my own land. I'd build something with my own hands. And I'd choose who to love." Her breath caught. "Isaiah." He turned to her, eyes steady. "Do you know what it's like," he said softly, "to choose nothing in your own life? Not where you walk, not what you learn, not whether you live or die." Eleanor swallowed. "I do." He blinked at her, surprised. She looked down at her hands. "I chose none of this," she whispered. "Not Charles, not this house, not this life. My father traded me like a bargaining chip, and I have lived under another man's rules ever since." Isaiah's voice softened. "You deserve better than that." "I deserve nothing," she said. "But I want something." She didn't finish. He stepped closer, lifting her chin with one hand so she met his gaze. "What do you want, Eleanor?" "You," she whispered. And when his mouth met hers again, it was no longer careful or cautious. It was hungry, aching, desperate in its truth. Weeks passed. Their bond deepened. Some nights, they simply lay on the floor of the library, talking until the moonlight faded. Some nights, Eleanor cried quietly in his arms, overwhelmed by the danger and the desire she could not abandon. Isaiah held her each time, his thumb stroking small circles on her back as if soothing a frightened bird. Some nights, they kissed until her lips were swollen and his hands shook. They never undressed, never crossed the final threshold. But that restraint only made the longing sharper, more unbearable. Isaiah would press his forehead to hers and say, "If I take more from you, there's no way back." And Eleanor would tremble, whispering, "We're already past the point of return." But he held the line because he knew the consequences better than she did. because he loved her enough to fear what their love might cost. But secrets, no matter how carefully tended, begin to crack. A door left slightly ajar, a hand touched too long, a glance held one heartbeat more than it should, and in Cypress Gate, cracks attracted eyes, especially the eyes of Charles Marsh. Suspicion does not arrive like a thunderclap. It arrives like a draft beneath a closed door, soft, creeping, unnoticed until it is too late. For weeks, Cypress Gate went about its rhythms. The fields, the kitchen bell, the endless rituals of plantation life. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. A new watchfulness lingered in the halls. Footsteps paused a moment too long. Conversation stopped when certain people entered the room. And at the center of it all stood Charles Marsh, a man who trusted no one, not even his own wife. It began with glances. Charles noticed Eleanor leaving the garden later than usual, her cheeks flushed, her eyes unsettled. He noticed Isaiah crossing the yard at the exact same time, wiping his hands on his trousers, though no tools were nearby. He noticed silence fall whenever he approached certain corners of the house, as if words had been hastily swallowed. He watched. He waited. And Eleanor felt it. She felt it that evening when her husband's hand gripped her wrist too tightly as he escorted her into the parlor for supper guests. "You seem distracted lately," he murmured, smiling too broadly for the visiting neighbors. "Your mind is wandering." Eleanor forced a polite laugh. "It's the storm repairs. The levees, repairs that a slave should be handling." His smile sharpened. "Not you." Her throat tightened. "I oversee the accounts." "You oversee nothing unless I say so," he whispered, the words hidden beneath the sound of the guests' chatter. Something cold slid into Eleanor's spine. The fear she had learned to swallow years ago began to rise again. That same night, in the quarters, Isaiah felt the shift too. Ben approached him as they scrubbed mud from the day's tools. "You been careful?" Ben whispered. Isaiah didn't answer. "You need to be," Ben said. "Marsh been staring holes through you all day. Ain't natural for a white man to look at one of us like that unless he planning something." Isaiah kept his face unreadable. "I'm doing my work." "And you best keep doing only that," Ben murmured. "Ain't nothing on this land worth your life." Isaiah didn't say the words burning on his tongue. Not worth my life, but worth my heart. Instead, he nodded, though his chest felt tight enough to crack. 3 days later came the first confrontation. Eleanor was arranging ledgers in the study when Charles entered without knocking, closing the door behind him with a click that made her skin crawl. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I haven't." "You have." He stepped closer. "Which makes me wonder, where exactly have you been spending your evenings?" Her pulse stumbled. She forced herself to stay still. "In the library. Reading." "Reading what?" "Thoreau. Poetry. Anything to ease my nerves." He circled her slowly, like a hunter examining his prey. "And who have you been reading it with?" Eleanor's breath froze. "No one," she said. Charles reached out and lifted her chin with 2 fingers, his grip firm enough to bruise. "You lie poorly, wife." For the first time in years, Eleanor felt real danger, raw and immediate, radiating from the man she had once been forced to call husband. By the next week, Marsh took full control. He dismissed several housemates for negligence. He reshuffled assignments, sending Isaiah to the far end of the plantation during daylight hours. He ordered the overseer to keep Isaiah within sight at all times. But the most chilling command was the one he gave Eleanor. "You are not to leave your room after sundown," he said plainly at breakfast, not bothering to hide his glare. "It is unseemly for a woman to roam the house at night." Her spoon clattered against her teacup. You cannot confine me like a child, she protested. Yes, he said, his voice cold as the silverware between them. I can. And if I refuse? His smile was thin and cruel. Then the overseer will escort you to bed himself. Eleanor's stomach twisted. Something inside her broke. That night, she did not obey. She waited until the house slept, until the lamps were dimmed and the corridors silent. Then, barefoot, she crept to the one place her heart led her, the back passage where Isaiah often hauled firewood before dawn. She waited for him, but he did not come. Minutes crawled by. The night stretched longer, colder. Her breath fogged in the unlit corridor as she clutched the wall for support, her whole body shaking with a mixture of fear and longing and the sickening realization that she might have lost her chance to warn him. She turned to leave, and stopped dead. Charles Marsh stood at the end of the hallway. He held a lantern in one hand, a riding crop in the other. His eyes, flat and triumphant, told her everything. "Looking for someone?" he asked. Eleanor's heart plummeted. The next morning, Isaiah was dragged before the sheriff. "Suspicion of assault," the sheriff said. "Suspicion of attempting to corrupt a white woman. Suspicion of intent to flee. Suspicions enough to warrant punishment." Eleanor tried to intervene. "Sheriff, this is a mistake. Mrs. Marsh, your husband has testified." And with that single line, the truth was sealed. Suspicion had become accusation. Accusation had become sentence, and the rope had begun its slow tightening around Isaiah's life. The jail behind the Charleston courthouse had always smelled of rust and rot, but on the night Isaiah awaited his punishment, the air held something sharper, the scent of danger, metallic and electric, like the moment before lightning touches ground. He sat in the narrow cell, wrists chained, ankles shackled, the bruises from the sheriff's men blooming dark across his ribs. A single lantern flickered outside the bars, its weak glow carving long shadows across the stone floor. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had done nothing but wait. Wait for dawn. Wait for the whip. Wait for whatever fate Charles Marsh had planned. Outside, thunder prowled in the distance, the promise of another storm, but the real storm was already in motion. At Cypress Gate, Eleanor moved like a ghost through her own house. She had torn through drawers, overturned trunks, ripped open every locked cabinet. She found maps, loose coins, a small pistol Baptiste had once gifted her, and the deed papers Charles never let her touch. Nothing she found mattered. Only one thing mattered. Isaiah. Her mind burned with images of the whipping post. His back splitting open, his body collapsing, his breath shuddering, his spirit, his quiet, steady, unbreakable spirit, being crushed under the law's unforgiving heel. She had sat obediently for years. She had smiled at supper tables. She had let men reduce her life to wallpaper and propriety, but tonight something deeper than courage surged within her. A vow. He will not die for loving me. Thunder cracked, and Eleanor made her choice. She stormed into the quarters to find Ben, breathless and pale. "Where is the key to the tool wagon?" she demanded. Ben stiffened. "Mrs. Marsh, what you planning?" "Isaiah is to be whipped at dawn." Ben's face darkened. "We know." Thunder rolled again, closer. "You're going to help me stop it," she said. Ben stared at her, really stared, searching her face for hesitation, for fear, for the slightest hint she might be acting from guilt and not conviction. He found none. "You're serious," he whispered. "Yes." Ben swallowed. "If we're caught." "I said yes," she repeated, voice sharper, stronger, braver than she had ever been allowed to be. Ben nodded once. "Then we act now." Back at the jail, Isaiah lifted his head when he heard footsteps. The sheriff's deputy stopped outside his cell. "Your owner came by tonight," the deputy sneered. "Said to remind you the lash breaks even the proudest men." Isaiah didn't speak. His silence enraged the deputy. A fist cracked across Isaiah's jaw. Blood filled his mouth. Still, silence. "You'll scream soon enough," the deputy spat, storming away. Isaiah leaned his head against the cold stone wall, breathing through the pain. Not for the first time, he wished he had told Eleanor to stay away from him, to leave him to his fate long before the bond between them had grown into something neither of them could escape. But even now, even here, he knew he would not trade a single moment he'd had with her. Rain began to fall in a rapid drum against the roof, and then voices, movement, a commotion outside. The deputy cursed. "Who's out there?" He moved toward the door. It blew inward with a gunshot. A lantern shattered. Flames licked up the spilled oil. Smoke burst into the corridor. The deputy fell, screaming. Two silhouettes burst through the doorway, Ben in front, Eleanor behind him, veil soaked, pistol trembling in her hands. Isaiah," she called breathlessly. He stared at her in disbelief. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you," she said fiercely. Ben smashed the cell lock with a crowbar, shattering the hinge. Isaiah staggered forward, but his chains clanged violently. "Keys," Ben hissed. The deputy moaned on the ground, reaching feebly for his belt. Eleanor kicked it away, snatched the ring of keys, and dropped to her knees beside Isaiah. Her hands trembled as she fitted the key into the first shackle. "Eleanor," Isaiah said softly, "you have to go." "No," she snapped, tears mixing with rain. "Not without you." The second shackle fell open. From outside, shouts erupted. "The jail is on fire!" "Someone's breaking out a slave." "Call for the militia." Ben swore. "We're out of time." Isaiah grabbed Eleanor's arm. "We have to run." But the corridor behind them was engulfed in flame, the oil from the shattered lantern now a raging line of fire. Smoke poured through the narrow hall. The only other exit was through the sheriff's office. They ran. The storm outside had grown violent, rain slashing sideways, mud swallowing their steps. Hoofbeats thundered across the yard, white men rushing from every direction. Ben grabbed Isaiah's arm. "This way, through the alley." "No," Eleanor gasped. "The marsh path. No horses can follow through that mud." "The marsh will swallow us whole," Ben objected. "It only swallows those who don't know where the ground is firm," she said. "I know it. Isaiah knows it." Isaiah nodded. "She's right." A gunshot cracked overhead. Ben flinched. "Then lead the way." They sprinted as the storm roared like an angry animal, lightning revealing the militia riding in from the next street, rifles already raised. Eleanor slipped. Isaiah caught her arm and pulled her upright. "Keep going," he urged. Behind them, shouts, gunshots, the blaze of the burning jail casting a hellish glow across the street. Ahead of them, the marsh, dark, dangerous, unforgiving. Eleanor's skirts tore against the reeds. Ben stumbled in the deep mud. Isaiah held both of them steady. Thunder cracked overhead. And then a voice bellowed, "Stop!" Charles Marsh. He stood atop the rise, a lantern in one hand, a rifle in the other, rain soaking his clothes, eyes burning with rage so bright it bordered on madness. "You think you can run with my property?" he roared at Eleanor. "With a slave, you disgrace, you whore." Eleanor stepped in front of Isaiah, breath shaking but unbroken. "I will not let you hurt him." "You cannot stop me," Charles snarled, lifting his rifle. Isaiah moved instantly, shoving Eleanor behind him just as Charles fired. The bullet tore into Isaiah's shoulder. He staggered, but did not fall. Ben lunged forward, tackling Charles. The rifle flew from his hands. They crashed into the mud, rolling. Charles clawed for a knife at his belt. Ben grabbed his wrist. "Run!" Ben shouted through gritted teeth. "Go, now!" "No!" Eleanor cried. "Ben!" Isaiah grabbed her hand. "He's buying us time," he said. "We can't waste it." Another shot rang out. It was impossible to tell who fired or who screamed. Eleanor felt the world tilt, her breath vanish, but Isaiah pulled her forward. Through the reeds, through the mud, through the storm, toward whatever future or death awaited them. The storm did not stop for them. It chased them through the marsh like a living thing, wind clawing at their clothes, mud dragging at their feet, the sky tearing open again and again with shards of white lightning. Eleanor clung to Isaiah's hand, her breath coming in quick, terrified bursts. His shoulder bled freely down his arm, each step slower than the last, but he did not let go. Not once. Behind them, the gunshots faded, then the shouting, then everything, only the storm remained. They stumbled deeper into the reeds until the land finally rose beneath them, a rare patch of firm ground known only to those who had walked the marsh for years. Isaiah collapsed to one knee, gripping his wounded shoulder. "We need to stop the bleeding," Eleanor said, dropping beside him. "You shouldn't touch me," he whispered. Rain streaked his face, though whether it was water or tears she couldn't tell. "Not now, not like this." "Isaiah," she said, her voice breaking, "I have touched you in far more dangerous moments than this." A weak smile tugged at his lips. "That's true." She tore a strip from her petticoat and pressed it to the wound, ignoring his flinch of pain. "The bullet missed the bone," she said, relief trembling through her. "You'll live." He exhaled slowly. "Will we?" The question lingered in the air, heavy as the storm clouds above them. "Ben," she whispered. Isaiah lowered his head. "He bought us the chance to run. That was his choice." Thunder rolled, long and low. "And after tonight?" he asked. "There's no hiding, no going back." Eleanor looked at him, at the man she had nearly lost, at the man who had risked everything for a love the world condemned before it ever began. "There is North," she said. "There are free states. There is a life where no one owns you, where no one owns me." "You would leave all this behind?" he asked softly. She thought of the house, the fields, the silver spoons, the portraits on the walls. She thought of every year she had spent locked inside a gilded cage. "Yes," she said, "I would leave everything." He reached up, slowly, painfully, and touched her cheek, muddy fingers trembling. "Eleanor." The word held everything: apology, longing, fear, devotion, hope. She leaned her forehead against his. "Whatever happens next, Isaiah, we face it together. I will not let your life be taken because we dared to feel what others forbid." His eyes closed. Rain fell on both of them like baptism. "Then together," he whispered. They stayed there until the storm eased enough for them to walk. When dawn finally broke, pale and uncertain, they began moving north. One step, then another, toward a future neither could name, but both chose anyway. The marsh swallowed their footprints behind them. By the time Charles Marsh was found dead in the mud, and the sheriff came searching for the fugitive slave and the runaway wife, they were already miles beyond reach. Isaiah and Eleanor vanished into the patchwork of safe houses and sympathetic hands that formed the Underground Railroad. Rumors of them drifted like smoke. Two figures traveling under moonlight, a woman with auburn hair, a man with a wounded shoulder, both walking toward the promise of their own lives. Some said they reached Philadelphia. Some said they married under new names. Some said they disappeared into Canada before the war began. No one knew for certain. But the story lingered, whispered in kitchens, in barns, in the quiet spaces where truth outlives the law. Love is strongest where it is forbidden, and freedom is the price two hearts will always choose to pay together. The story is over, but the pain of that era still echoes in the bones of history. How are you feeling right now? Are you listening to this story alone or with someone? Share your feelings and your city or country with me.